Hi, curious friend. Welcome to Building Your Best Brain podcast. If you are new here, welcome. If you are not new here, welcome back. Basically, just to catch some people up to speed, whether you're dabblers or you're new, the last couple weeks we've been focusing a lot on goals. How to structure goals for your brain, how to remove any blocks that help you or basically hinder you from being as consistent as you'd like, help you with motivation as well as momentum. And then my last one, which is one of my favorites, is how to reward your brain, whether it's goals or basically how to impact your attention so that you can build that momentum in your brain and learning a bit more about our brain's reward system. Now, whether you like it or not, that era is over. And we're going into a new era of the podcast, a topic that is very topical of the moment right now. So we're February 2026, and for the next at least month, once a week, if not potentially longer, depending on the response, depending on the questions, is looking at fear and your brain. The reason being two. So, one, we have fears within ourselves, right? Whether you want to label those insecurities, limiting beliefs, worries, things we maybe picked up from childhood, things that we've maybe learned along the way living our life. We may have had them for decades, we may have had them for, a year, a few weeks. But then there's also what's happening externally. And externally at this time, and we have been for many years, maybe even decades, have been bombarded with scary messages, world events, fearful things from the news. And this has increased a lot with social media and with people basically bidding and persuading you where attention is our currency, attention is essentially money. People are doing whatever they can to get it. And fear is an incredibly effective way of getting your attention. And whether you think you're being smart with how you consume the news or thinking that news or social media does not impact you, it is impacting you. And it's not because you don't have willpower, it's not because you're broken. You're not, but it's literally how our brain is designed. And the reason why I want to focus on this is because our attention, yes, in the capitalistic market is currency, but when we think about it ourselves as an individual, our attention is our control. It helps our brain direct its activity, it helps us make decisions, it helps us choose actions. It helps guide our life. So when we lose our attention, we are extremely easily manipulated, whether it's, again, those external fears, news, social media, clickbaity sort of things, or it is our intrinsic fears. Again, whether we're aware of them or not, they are guiding our attention and really biasing what we do every single day. And so this is what we're going to focus on this month. So buckle up, guys. It's going to be really good, I promise. And what we're going to go through today is around fear and your attention. And so looking at it at the level of the brain, kicking off with kind of conscious versus unconscious. Then we'll get into the different fear centers in our brain, where they're projecting to in our brain in terms of how they're impacting what we do at the level of the body, what we do in terms of actions. And then I'll leave you with a tool, as I do, I'm pretty sure every single podcast. If you don't like homework, it's okay. I'm going to give it to you anyway. Use it, don't use it. I'll leave it at your own risk. but I will give a tool to be able to start recognizing whether your attention is being hijacked or not. And through this recognition, understanding the underlying circuitry behind that helps so much. And not enough people do this. Again, not because they're broken, but I think people don't realize how this is all working in the brain and how much of an impact it has on your entire life. So, with that being said, let's start with how fear is impacting your attention on a conscious and unconscious level. And we're going to start with external fears first. So, looking at the news, looking at clickbaity material, and then we'll get into the internal fears and worries. So, let's use social media as an example. Let's say, you're opening your phone and you see a clip about one of the unfortunately many wars that are going on in the world right now. And you see a clip of starving children. When you're seeing that for the first time, your prefrontal cortex, right, so the front of your brain that houses your executive functions, it helps decrease your impulses, it helps filter information to send to the rest of the areas of your brain, and it helps you make decisions. It has a lot of really specialized parts. It's starting to pay attention. So it's getting this higher frequency firing, maybe a little dopamine's coming off, like, ooh, we need to pay attention to this because it is distressing and essentially threatening information. To see people starving, not having a home, things of that nature. Those are things that our brain is primed to pay attention to because it's threatening. Yes, it's not happening to you, but just the fact that this is in existence right now, it's in existence at the same time that you're existing, is something that our brain is primed to pay attention to. And the thing with the news, the thing with social media, it is incredible how little control we have to what pops up in our screen. So, of course, there are algorithms, right, that are feeding you what you're paying attention to. And that does play a factor into this, right? That you can control, if you're saving and liking and spending time on content that is, helping you towards your goals or is more uplifting or is not as fearful, that's great. But still, there's an element of when you scroll, you don't know what the next thing that's going to be coming across your path is going to be. And because, our brain is not going to pay attention to really positive things. Unless it evokes an emotional response, that definitely helps, right? But with threatening information, our brain is especially primed to protect us and it's going to pay attention to it longer, even a second or a millisecond. It just is. Because you are a warm-blooded, functioning human being, not because you don't have willpower or you're not motivated, none of that. It's truly how we're wired. And so as that happens and we get that stimulation over and over again, like think about how many times a day we get a hit around a war, around politics, around people dying, around people getting sick, around economic collapse. It's a lot, right? You probably don't even have a number right now because that's how many times it's happening to you on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. And so your brain is registering that information and it's storing it and stimulating other circuits at the back of your brain. When you stimulate those circuits get stronger. The idea, taking from the principle cells that fire together, wire together, I'll leave a podcast in the show notes where I go into that more deeply, but essentially through activity, right, through stimulation, circuits will find ways biologically, like physiologically, to get stronger so that they don't need the same amount of stimulation in order to fire, right? And so with things that are threatening, we'll get into what kind of circuits those are going to elicit in your brain and what kind of responses you're going to have in your body. Now, this happens enough. We will get into an area or kind of more of a phase where we will be desensitized to the information. What that means, desensitization, and this is studied a lot in the context of addiction or even drug dependence. The difference being addiction is a disorder where there is an inability to stop using or abusing substances, right? So drugs, alcohol, those kinds of things. And of course, addiction can be not behaviorally impacting as well. And basically, your whole life centers around getting more of it, to a point that it is destructive and impacts your daily function and relationships. But even for drug dependency, right? So let's say you're not abusing drugs. Let's say you have a drug that you've been prescribed, right? And it helps you, and then at a certain point it doesn't. What do? Do you decrease the dose? No, you increase the dose. And the reason is because at that dosage, it does not stimulate. Basically, the neurons don't respond the same way, that they need more to be able to have that same physiological impact on your brain and your body. And the same goes with the news, right? Because eventually you get this enough that you don't have that same fearful or threatening or sickening response to it. But it's still stimulating that circuit. But because you don't have that same level of response in your body, you might assume that it does not impact you anymore. And this is where the consciousness piece comes in, where you're actually not aware of how it's impacting your brain. So you might have this idea that, you can see, which is really unfortunate, but we're here, right? Dead bodies on your phone, and it doesn't impact you. And that's because you need more stimulation for that dopamine to come off at your frontal cortex to bring some awareness to what's happening. But I mean, that information is still going in and still stimulating those circuits further back in your brain. So whether it's conscious or unconscious, it is grabbing your attention. So it is impacting circuits in your brain that lead to different responses in your body and your behavior. How does this work when it comes to internal fears, worries, insecurities? Well, basically, I've come across quite a few people, right? And it's interesting because it is good advice, but it's also not good advice for your brain, where it is around ignoring your insecurities or your fears. And if you've been with me for a long time, one of my New Year's resolutions 2 years ago, 2024, was to not say my fears out loud. And the reason for that is because I didn't want to stimulate them over and over again. And we talk a little bit about that in the episode 30 around rewarding your brain. But something happens when you completely ignore it as well. When you completely ignore it, the assumption is that you're not stimulating it, you're not giving it more activity, it's not being activated. But if we have a circuit that's really strong, so let's say we've had this worry, this fear, this insecurity when we were children, right? Maybe like 7, 8, 10, even like early teens, 13, 14. And it's persisted for a while. It means that it's incredibly strong. And when a circuit is incredibly strong, it does not need a lot of stimulation to fire. And so you can be out and about in your day, doing things with your friends, talking with your partner, doing things that are very, not threatening. And then all of a sudden, feel this response in your body, feel really stressed out, feel triggered. And that's because even though you've ignored that fear or insecurity, that doesn't translate to your brain not finding stimulation for it. It is primed to find stimulation for it because it's a really strong circuit, right? So as you're scanning throughout your day, right, scanning frontal lobe things, it'll continue to send inputs to it whether you ignore it or not. And that's where, you can be choosing to ignore your insecurities, but unconsciously it is still impacting what you choose to pay attention to, which again isn't really a choice, right? If you have really strong fear centers in your brain, you are allowing it to dictate your actions, your reactions, your decision-making process. And so while you may think, well, I'm ignoring those things, or I'm ignoring the news, or, when I see stuff, it doesn't impact me. It's grabbing your attention, whether you're aware of it or not. And so once your attention is grabbed, again, whether you're aware of it or not, you got that stimulation. Where is it going? And how is it impacting you? How is it impacting your brain? How is it impacting your body? There is no way, and you guys will hear about this for the rest of the month, I'm sure. There's no way that I can talk about fear in your brain without bringing up our fun little friend, the amygdala. So the amygdala is an almond-shaped structure that is in our limbic region. So if you're with me on video, I'll try and point to it. Not that I'm going to coconut crack my head open. But our frontal lobes in the front, then we have our parietal right behind it. We got our occipital in the back, and then underneath kind of all of those structures, we have our temporal lobe. And this is where a lot of our emotions, memory, intrinsic processing, auditory as well, is found. And our amygdala is found in those regions. It has projections to a lot of different areas in the temporal lobe. And this is where our amygdala is where our fear circuits, and they often say fear circuits and fear behaviors are housed. And because it projects to different parts of our brain, activating those fears, right? So when we think of our frontal lobe scanning for things and sending stimulation back to our amygdala, once those fears are activated, it'll project to different parts of the brain to do different things. One of the places that it projects to is structures involved in our stress response. I'll put in the show notes an episode where we talk about the two different stress responses. This is the slow stress response. So this is the HPA axis for my geeky friends, hypothalamic pituitary axis. That took a minute. It is a lot of words, to be fair. And this is the stress response where we activate and release cortisol in our adrenals. And it's called a slow response because it essentially activates a series of neurotransmitters and hormones. So they have to circulate before cortisol will start getting released. And then cortisol has to be released at a high enough level to kind of continue that activation. And so the amygdala, what's interesting is that it's able to stimulate it on its own. So they've done these studies in rats where they'll have a little probe, they activate the amygdala, cortisol increases. And the opposite is also true. They've done studies in rodents where they will cut those projections from the amygdala to the HPA axis, and that'll decrease levels of cortisol. So, what does that mean? What does it mean when it comes to scrolling through our phone, getting these disturbing images and messages, or when we are consciously or unconsciously thinking, activating our insecurities and worries? It means that we are increasing cortisol in our body. It means that our brain is under the assumption, is getting messages that we are being threatened, we are under attack, there's something not right, and we need to be prepared to take care of it, get rid of it, address it, whatever it may be. And cortisol is circulating through the body to help us do that. This means that, again, whether we're conscious of it or not, we're stressed. We have a higher level of baseline stress that is kind of misplaced in the sense that how our brain prepares our body for stress is not going to help with these kinds of stressors, right? It's you know, having more sugar released in your muscles or even just craving more sugar because your body's under the assumption that it needs more energy is not going to help you with your worries around money. It's not going to help you with, disturbing images popping up on your phone or disturbing messages flying through your inbox, which, with the stress response as well, is when it's chronic, right? When it continues, it's harder to shut it off when you have chronic repeated stress, especially when it's unpredictable. Because then your brain is hyper vigilant, it's hyper alert, and that's where the scrolling is really unpredictable. You'll don't know if what you're going to see is a cute animal or, war zone images or plane crashes or car crashes or people yelling at each other, or people fighting each other, right? Like the HPA axis will be harder to turn off, which means that cortisol will keep circulating. And over time, this is where the body and the brain, right, get to maladaptive places, right? Because the stress response was really to help us, to help protect us, and to help us stay balanced, right? So the idea is that, let's say we're presented with a threat, our brain then primes our body to take care of it. Once it's taken care of, it comes back to a balanced place where we can then, shuttle nutrients to the right place. We can, you know, deliver energy and like repair organs and you know what I mean? So being in this constant stimulation of our amygdala based off of our external circumstances really gets us off balance when it comes to our nervous system and our body. And it's the same with our personal fears, right? If they're constantly being activated, even if we're ignoring it, right, through the world around us, we'll get that increase in cortisol, we'll get that. And what it feels like, which is a little bit different for everyone, but it's this low level irritation and irritability and this ability to not be able to slow down, not be able to change perspectives, right? Because you're in that fearful place. It impacts how you eat. It impacts how your body shuttles nutrients. It impacts your sleep. A lot of people that I work with when it comes to brain training really struggle with sleep, and I can see it when we do brain scans in their brainwave activity. And it's often, not always, but it's often related to stress because we're not able to get back to that balanced place where we can begin to restore our brain, restore our body, heal, shuttle nutrients in the right place. And your amygdala, your fear center, can set all of that off. And if those circuits are strong, it's gonna find stuff. Whether you like it or not, it's going to find stuff to make it stronger and to stimulate those areas. Another area that is not often talked about, but is studied quite a bit in neuroscience is it'll also stimulate your basal ganglia. And your basal ganglia is also in this temporal region of the brain, temporal. It's associated with behavior. So it's associated with your motor functions, in particular, repetitive motor functions. And so this is where this will really blend in nicely with the tool I'm going to give you guys in a second around certain behaviors, certain stereotype is I guess, a fancy word of saying um, repetitive behaviors or behaviors within a certain like sequence. And a really good example of this is around when we are stressed, right? So thinking, right? So the amygdala has projections in our stress response and it has projections to the basal ganglia. Often when we're stressed, we will behave in kind of a predictable way. Like our body will do things or, our mind will go to certain places right away. For my friend who tends to eat when stressed, this idea of like, going to the vending machine or getting takeout or reaching your fridge when you have thoughts that elicit those fears or when you have a day where you've just come across a lot of bad news, that can be a stereotyped behavior. Biting nails, picking skin, ripping hair out, those can be linked to these types of behaviors. And they happen a lot with people that have attention deficit as well, which is interesting because attention deficit is linked with hypoactivity in your frontal region, right? So it's the idea that these stereotype behaviors, they don't need your conscious awareness of it, right? And that's often what makes them so hard to treat or so hard to change is because you're not aware that you're doing it until it's too late, essentially. Um, Other behaviors, even outbursts, right? And this is where the online space can be quite tricky because it's so activating, because it's activating all of our amygdalas. Again, whether we're conscious of it or not, is where our little thumb warriors come in, right? And this idea that you don't need your frontal lobe, it's truly not very involved in this process where you're activated, you're triggered, you're going to leave a comment that if you weren't in an activated or triggered place, you probably wouldn't leave, right? Where you're calling people stupid or where you're attacking people's character and I mean, it's very easy for us to look at people who've done that. And if you're in this category, that's okay because this is what happens when we are in a fearful, threatened state. This is what happens. So you're not broken. You're not broken. Your brain is doing what it's essentially supposed to do, right? And that's where the external stimuli, the news, the social media is hooking you in and essentially making you do things that you're going to regret. It makes you more easily manipulated because it knows how to play into your amygdala. It knows how to play into your brain's fear center and keep you watching more and be able to sway your decision making, be able to essentially get you to a place where you don't even need your frontal lobe that much, right? Because they're able to sway you in whatever direction and make you reactive and essentially not use all of your faculties. And that's really what I want to highlight here. I want to highlight that, you might not be aware of it, You may be aware of some of it, you might not be aware of all of it. It's causing real circuitry changes in your brain. It's not pretend, it's not willpower, it's not motivations, it's not intelligence. It's how your brain is wired. And it's getting strengthened based off of your own worries, based off of the news. All of these angles are playing with your fear, they're playing with your amygdala, and then your amygdala, whether you're aware of it or not, is increasing your stress response, which gets you further away from your balanced baseline. It makes you sicker, and it also forces you to behave in certain ways that only a fearful person would behave. Again, whether you're aware of it or not. You're not broken. You now have this information, which puts you way ahead of most people. And with this information, there is some power in it, right? Even just having this awareness alone, right? As you're scrolling through, or you're going through your emails, or you're having a hard conversation with someone and you feel yourself getting activated, you know what's happening at the level of your brain. You know that it might not be what you would choose if you weren't in a fearful place. And from this place, you can make real change at the level of your brain. You can really help guide it in a different direction. And through this guidance, you're making decisions from a balanced place. You're able to use your energy the way that you want to. There's lots of people in my world, and I'm so, so fortunate that see what's happening in the news and are devastated. And they want to be a part of the change. They want to be a part of the positive movement. And it's very sad to see them get so wrapped up in this amygdala cycle because I know that they cannot do that change that they desire from that place. They're basically just burning the candle at both ends, depleting themselves, getting reactive. And it's so tricky, right? Because people will then say, well, if you're not in a reactive state, then you don't care and you're a monster. And what I say to that is allowing yourself to be in an activated place is taking away your power to make positive change. And the least selfish thing you can do is to work on these fears, to work on stress regulation, because that is where your power is. Your power is in a balance. Your power is in a balanced brain. And so how do we get there? Amazing question. Thank you for asking. Incredible, incredible question. The first thing, because there's so many things to do here, and I don't want to overwhelm you, and this is why we're doing this month-long, Fear and Your Brain series, is to recognize when it's being activated, especially considering how much of it is unconscious. And when you recognize it, it's a huge step to being able to decouple that circuit, dismantle that circuit, be able to reduce your stress. And so that way you have way more of a control of that attention and it won't get hijacked the same way. And the best way to do that, and I'm going to link the exercise in the show notes. This is an exercise that I don't take everybody through it. In my brain training program where we have at-home EEG devices, we pair them with meditation and we do reprogramming tools along the way to figure out our fear circuit, our stress circuit. That's month one. It's to be able to start to identify it, how it's showing up every day. And so it's basically a table where you'll pick a few moments in your day. You'll write them down in one column And then you look at the thoughts, the judgments, or the behaviors that came out of that moment. What do you make it mean about yourself? Where are past experiences that has come up for you? Like, what's the source of that worry or fear? And then how does it show up in your body? And with my brain training clients, we do this for at least 2 weeks, sometimes a month. And it's never, because you might be like, I already know it. You probably don't, because there's a lot that's unconscious. And doing this exercise really helps illuminate what your patterns are. And once you know what your patterns are, you are able to redirect, to uncouple, grab a hold of your attention and drag it, kicking and screaming, but hopefully not kicking and screaming, to where you want it to go. And so the exercise that I'd like you guys to do, and if you're in this, I really strongly encourage you to follow along every week because we're going to build off of this information. So try it for a week. Try for a week. There's a Google Drive link here, and either put it in the comments if you feel comfortable, but if you don't feel comfortable, you can follow me on Instagram at synaptic.sylvie and send me a personal direct message. If you're finding that any questions come up or you're struggling to pick those events or to dig them in deeper, I'm happy to work through any blocks because it's just so incredibly important that we are the masters of our attention. We're in a world that's been taken away from us. And this kind of information and this kind of practice goes so much further than simply regulating your stress response, which is already like a huge step forward. That's going to pull you away, unfortunately, from the majority of the population if you're able to regulate yourself, right? We're in a freaking epidemic where anxiety is through the roof. So being able to regulate your stress already pulls you away from most of the herd. But when we think about big, scary questions like what direction the world is going in, being a master regulator of your attention is going to make the world you live in, the world I live in, the world everybody else lives in, a way better, safer, more productive place. Which is a fancy way of me saying, do not be shy to send me a message if you find at any point this kind of work, this kind of table brings up anything in you, because it would be an absolute honor and pleasure to help you to continue down this journey. So listen to this a couple times. There's a lot in here so that you can really allow these principles to sink in on how your fear is hijacking your attention, whether you're aware of it or not. And start taking some of that power back by simply noticing where your attention is going to. What kind of circuits, behaviors, thoughts, beliefs is it stimulating on a daily basis, and what those patterns are. And then we'll reconvene next week, same time, same place, and continue to build off of our knowledge when it comes to the fear in the brain. Again, all working towards how we can come back to our balanced selves, because that's where our power lies. Thank you so much for sticking with me with this entire episode. Super appreciate it. On behalf of your brain, I'm also thanking you, knowing that you're doing an incredible job and that you're incredibly elite for sticking around and entertaining all these ideas and really thinking about how you can rewire your brain to start working for you. It's been an honor, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Take care.